Welcome to Political Thinking, where I have a conversation with, rather than an interrogation of, someone who shapes our political thinking about what has shaped theirs. My guest this week has a pretty daunting task. They have to persuade Britain to persuade you that Labour can be trusted with your money. There again, Rachel Reeves, who was made Shadow Chancellor in May, is used to thinking a few moves ahead. She used to be under 14's UK chess champion. Maybe she has a winning gambit. Rachel Reeves,
Great
welcome to Political Thinking. UK under 14's champion is quite something. You once said that chess was the perfect preparation for politics. Really?
Well, it's about getting you to look ahead, to think strategically and not just tactically, and to think about what your opponent's next move is going to be as well as your own.
Great chess players have to be able to deceive, don't they? They have to...
It's not poker.
Yeah, but the whole notion of a gambit...
A gambit, yeah, giving something up to get an advantage elsewhere.
Yeah, sacrificing the little people, the pawns. It's very tough business.
I didn't play the Queen's Gambit, actually. I was more Sicilian defence.
The Sicilian. Now, you have to forgive me. I am a very, very basic chess player.
All right.
What's the Sicilian defence, if you're going to explain it to a lay person?
So it's a defence you do if you're playing black, and the white player moves their king's pawn forward 2 spaces, and then the opponent, the first move, they move their queen's bishop's pawn 2 places. That is the start of the Sicilian
There are people around
defence.
the country nodding, and there are others going, what
oh my goodness,
on earth is she talking about?
Turn on to Radio 3.
Now, I read up a little bit about the Sicilian defence because I knew it was your favourite move, and I'm told that it is turning defence very quickly into attack. Is that right?
Yes, and I was an attacking chess player.
Yeah.
And I liked... So you have a lot of... when you're playing in big tournaments, you'll get like 2 hours on your clock to do all your moves, and then you get a bit of extra time later on. I like that, but I actually did better, I think, in sort of speed chess and just going for it.
Yeah. So were you inspired when you watched The Queen's Gambit on the telly?
Well, I
that
did.
Series with the young woman who, like you, had to overcome, I suspect, a hell of a lot of male prejudice.
Well, yes. I mean, look, chess was a lot less glamorous when I played compared to what you see in the Queen's Gambit. But yes, chess is incredibly male-dominated. It was when I was playing in the 80s and 90s, and it is still today. But there were these female chess players, the Polgar sisters. Judith Polgar was probably the best amongst, I think there were 3 of them. And when I was probably about 11, 12, I think she became the best female player in history and the highest ever rated female player. I think she was the youngest grandmaster ever. I mean, she was absolutely amazing. And then people started thinking, actually, women can be quite good at chess. But there was a lot of prejudice. I remember one of the earliest chess games I played, which was in my primary school hall. And it was a weekend, a chess tournament. And I was drawn against another player, and we were sitting opposite each other. And his friend came over and said, "Oh, lucky for you, you've got a girl. You'll win easily." And I was absolutely determined to win that game, and win I did.
Did you just win, or did you, as Bobby Fischer, one of the great grandmasters, once said, that chess was war over the board? The object, he said, is to crush the opponent's mind. Did you crush his mind?
I certainly don't want to be compared to Bobby Fischer, who had some very odd views about many things. I wasn't sure if I wanted to crush his mind, but I wanted to show that girls are just as good as boys.
Was it at home then, not just where your dad wanted you to play good chess, but was it at home where you taught politics a lot? Was it at home where you would sit round the table having your tea or having your breakfast and talking politics?
So again, at primary school, about the same age when I was 8, and it was 1987, it was the general election, and my friends were talking about who their mums and dads were going to be voting for in the election. And I'm afraid, Nick, I had no idea what they were talking about, and I felt really embarrassed. I went home and I asked my dad, and my dad put on the 6 o'clock news for us, and he said, "That's Neil Kinnock, and that's who we vote for." And I repeated this story in 2010, just after I got elected, and my dad, I was on the phone to him later that week, and he said, "I don't think that story is quite true." And I said, "But Dad, you were like massively Labour." And he said, "Yes, but if that's the case, it must be the first time in your life you've ever done anything I've told you to do." But I do remember it quite vividly.
So they point at the telly and they say, "Look, that Neil Kinnock, he's our guy." But were you debating issues? Were you talking about it? Or was it more just, that's who we are? Your parents were both primary school teachers.
Yes.
Like a lot of people in the public sector, they would have looked to Labour at that stage, with Mrs Thatcher in power. Was it just a given? We're Labour people, that's who we are.
They were never members of political parties. They were, and that wasn't something we talked about hugely at home. But there was always that backdrop. My mum was a special needs teacher. Special needs teaching funding was cut, and so she became a classroom teacher. But it meant that the kids that she had been supporting who needed support weren't getting it anymore.
Did they shout at the telly though? If Mrs Thatcher came on the news, you may remember she was known as TBW. That bloody woman was how she was known.
No, they weren't massively. They weren't members. They didn't go out campaigning or anything like that. We didn't go on demos or anything like that. My dad's parents, they were Salvationists, very much committed to the Salvation Army. Incredibly good people, incredibly hardworking. They'd never had very much, but everything they had, they gave back to the community. They were just absolutely wonderful people, and they were a big inspiration to me.
So were those values sort of drilled into you, even if politics wasn't?
Yes, sort of Christian socialist values, I think, are my values. And I was always brought up that you should give something back, but also that you should work as hard as you can to make a contribution.
Now, Mrs Thatcher, you say, was not liked in your house, but it wasn't that political. When you look back now, what do you think of her? Are there things to learn from her? Are there things to admire about her, even though there's so much you disagree with?
Look, I mean, I was politicised because when I was at school, there were so many cuts. And when I was in the sixth form, our sixth form were 2 prefab huts in the playground. Our library was turned into a classroom because there were more students than there was space. And there were never enough textbooks to go round. And I learnt that the Conservative governments we had when I grew up in the 80s and 90s, they didn't care enough about schools like mine and the kids that I grew up with. And that's why I joined the Labour Party. It's those values and that experience that still drives me.
No, I get that. You disagree with their politics, but there are people who say, hey, look, we have to learn something.
So what I would say, I wrote a book about women in politics, and obviously I wrote about Thatcher in that book. And what it made me think was that when I was growing up, I knew I didn't like the direction she was taking the country in, but I never doubted that a woman could lead and get the top job, because there she was doing it. And I didn't agree with her politics and her values, but I think in some ways, she inspired women to believe that they could do it.
You've got these kind of working class values, haven't you, coming from your grandparents, coming from that shoe factory, but it's a classic middle class upbringing, isn't it? You're in Bromley in south east London, now known for a slightly more famous daughter of Bromley.
Emma Raducanu, yes.
Hi.
I've been eclipsed. H.G. Wells, Charles Darwin.
Yes.
Enid
Blyton.
Superstars. Enid Blyton.
Pixie
My
Lott,
daughter
I
is a
read.
huge fan. We've got the whole collection of Mallory Towers, and I think in the last 2 weeks she's gone through about half of them. So yes, Enid Blyton as well.
But it's a very middle class upbringing, isn't it? I mean, Bromley's middle class, your parents are both teachers. It's not comfortable, I wouldn't have thought. Well, was it as an upbringing?
It was just ordinary. It was ordinary. Myself and my younger sister. My parents were good parents. They worked hard. They always put us first. They did a huge amount for us. The chess, music lessons. They were good parents who cared about our education. And we were lucky in a lot of ways. At my secondary school, very few children stayed on to do A-levels, even fewer went to university. There were loads of really bright girls at my school who, perhaps didn't get the opportunities that I had. And I want to spread that opportunity. Look, again, I was lucky. My parents, and actually the reason I carried on playing, I played the flute as well as my chess, and I carried on going to those lessons and practising every week because I knew it mattered to my dad, because those lessons were expensive and we didn't have a huge amount of money, but he wanted me to have the best opportunities in starting life. But
Which you did, because you then went on to Oxford University. And then when he In many ways, this is a sort of classic politician's upbringing. Oxford, I confess, yes, I went there too. You did PPE. This is what politicians in Britain do. Boris Johnson, Michael Gove, Rishi Sunak.
I mean, we are worlds apart. If you went to Eton, right, it is assumed that you're going to Oxbridge. If you went to Winchester College, it's assumed. I remember at my school, when I was in year 11, my GCSE year, having a special assembly where the head teacher said, for the first time ever, 2 girls from our school have applied to Oxford University, and I want you to all think of them today. And I remember those 2 girls, I remember their names, and I remember thinking then, maybe I could do that. And it never occurred to me before, because no one from our school had ever done that before. And so I did.
Do they know that you remember them?
Yes, because one of them, the one who got in, she went to my college, and when I had to decide what college I was going to apply for, you know, these names of these colleges, never heard of them. And I applied to the one that she went to because I thought, well, they've taken a girl from my school. They took a punt on this girl who'd never, the school that never sent anyone to this university before. Maybe they'll take a punt on me. And so I applied to that, and I went there and I said to her, I'm here because of you.
I mentioned the horror that you showed at the idea that you were very different from these Tory politicians. Rishi Sunak's background, the man you now shadow, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, of course, middle class, one parent a doctor, one a pharmacist, parents in the public sector, clever, swotty kid, I would say, rather like Rachel Reeves, did PP at Oxford. Do you see some similarities, though? Is there a connection there? You're not that different. You were at Oxford at the same time, weren't you?
Nick, I just think there's just huge differences. I mean, yeah, he went to Winchester College. His parents had a lot of money. You know, had the money to be able to send him there. We took different routes in life, and I think we had very different upbringings.
It's very interesting because he made his money in the city, and you could have done, couldn't you? You went
so I was
and
offered,
considered a job at Goldman Sachs.
I was offered 2 jobs when I finished university, Goldman Sachs and the Bank of England. And I chose the Bank of England because I wanted to be an economist and also because I believed in public service. And I had a great time at the bank. I learned a huge amount. I was my first job was on the Japan desk, analysing the Japanese economy at a time that they had 0 interest rates, quantitative easing, and had been in and out of recession for the best part of a decade. And little did I know that there might be parallels with our own economy a few years later.
I want to ask you about that Goldman Sachs, though. You applied, did you, to Goldman Sachs?
Yes, so I applied to some banks and I wanted to be an economist.
And did you sit there in that interview and think, I could work here, I could work at Goldman Sachs? Do you think if the bank hadn't offered you a job, Bank of England, you could have taken that job?
I had these 2 jobs in front of me, and I made a choice.
When you're at the Bank of England, you get seconded. Must be incredibly exciting when you're in your 20s. Seconded to the United States, you go and work in the British Embassy in Washington, D.C. at what was a fascinating time. This was just post 9/11.
It was, and the reason why the secondment was available was because the British government, the civil service, wanted to up their capacity at the British embassy in lots of different ways. One of them was its economic analysis. Obviously, there were huge problems in the global economy after 9/11, with recession and interest rates cut hugely, both in the US and around the world. And so I had the privilege, really, of working at the embassy and trying to understand what was going on in the US economy and feeding back to the Bank of England and to the Treasury. And it was, I was 23. I was living in Washington.
And did you meet the politicians coming across? Because often a young advisor of your sort would meet someone like the Chancellor, Gordon Brown, it would have been those days when he was coming over to Washington.
Well, actually, what I remember was Mervyn King coming over, who was then the incoming governor at the Bank of England, and he came over and he met Alan Greenspan, and I got to go to that meeting. The then governor of the Fed in Washington. We went into the White House and met Gregory Mankiw, who was the chief economic advisor to the president, who wrote the textbooks that we used at university. So ministers came over, but so did Mervyn King, and that was an amazing opportunity for me.
Now, you've only had this big job, this job of Shadow Chancellor, since May. You haven't got long, as I said in the introduction, to persuade people. Are you good at saying no?
look, in this job, you have to. And, every day colleagues will come with, really good ideas. But what I say is everything we say we're going to do, we've got to say how we would fund it. And that means you do have to say no to people, because you've got to prioritise. What would our priorities be as an incoming Labour government? I think around schools, around our NHS, and also about the jobs of the future, particularly in those green industries.
And what's the best advice you've had? Somebody taking you to one side and said, look, Gordon Brownie was Shadow Chancellor, Ed Balls was Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, have they said, if there's one thing I'd do?
Well, I've spoken to all of them when I was appointed to the job. And Gordon, who I admire a lot, he said, you've got to have the discipline, but you've got to have something that's worth being disciplined for. I mean, it's his prudence for a purpose, really, isn't it?
That's intriguing in a week in which the leader, Keir Starmer, has produced this long essay. The criticism of it is it's not very exciting. So is the task at this conference you've got coming up, is the task for Labour in the next year, is it about reassurance? Don't worry, we've learnt our lesson from all those defeats. Or is it, as you've just said, inspiration? Or are you saying we've got to do both?
We've got to do both. But in my job, and when Keir appointed me, he said people have got to be able to trust you with their money. So being trustworthy and being honest and straight with people is really important to me, and showing that I would treat taxpayers' money with respect, because people work hard for their money. I remember when I was little, my mum would keep all of her receipts. She'd get a bank statement and she would tick off the bank statement against the receipts. We weren't poor, but we didn't have money to waste, and she was careful with her money. And when you pay your taxes, I think the Chancellor has got to be equally careful with people's money.
What you've also got to do, though, is work out why you lost. Now, you wrote a book in 2010, Why Vote Labour. Could you write a book on why Labour lost the election that followed that book? And when did you first realise? Do you remember the moment you realised we're going to lose? It's over.
Well, Labour just keep losing. We've lost 4 elections in a row now. Only 3 moments, really, 1945, 1964 and 1997, when Labour has won, and we won big. And we made huge change. Why have we lost 4 elections in a row? Because, people didn't trust us in a whole range of different areas, and they preferred the others to us. And, we have got to look at ourselves and learn those lessons and turn those things around, as Clement Attlee did, as Harold Wilson did, and as Tony Blair did. And that is what I want to learn from, what we did on those 3 occasions.
OK, well, I want to talk about the positive in a second, but I think you need to understand, or we need to understand, what you think went wrong. You see, when I had this conversation with Ed Miliband on this podcast, he just produced his book, which was about Go Big. And I put it to him that Labour's problem was nothing to do with going big or going small. It was because you didn't listen to people, and you didn't like lots of people's attitudes. Whether it was on immigration, Labour appeared very judgmental. Whether it was on benefits, they appeared very judgmental. There was a sense, clearly later on Brexit, that Labour didn't like many of the people you need to vote for them, or vote for you.
And Keir has spent this, Keir totally recognises this, and that's why he spent this summer going the length and the breadth of the country, meeting people who haven't voted for us. In some occasions for many years, and some occasions, for some of them, the last election was the first time ever that they hadn't voted Labour. And yeah, we've got to listen, but also to take on board, what they're saying, and to change, because the Labour Party isn't a pressure group. It's a party that was formed by working people to give voice to working people in Parliament, and we're utterly failing in that mission.
There's an intriguing phrase in that pamphlet, which has clearly been chosen deliberately. Take back control. It's used by Keir Starmer in his long essay that's what voters want, and he thinks have not had. So were you saying in some way to people who voted Leave, I know why you voted Leave, I know you did want to take back control, but you haven't, but Labour will help you take back control. Is that the message?
Well, people, I think about my constituency, right? Average earnings about £24,000 a year, so around 2/3 of the national average, a bit less than that maybe. A lot of them are in insecure work. a lot of them are having to balance work with uncertain hours with childcare. Do people feel they've got control in their lives? They certainly don't. Do they want more control of their lives? Absolutely. And so I think that has got a good way of putting it, that people, that's what people want in their lives.
When you were on the front bench under Ed Miliband, you said some things that clearly would appeal to those sorts of voters, but got you into a bit of trouble, as I recall. You said at one point that you didn't want Labour to be the party of the unemployed.
Well, there was the question that was put to me, you know, is that what Labour is? I.e., is that just what Labour is? And Labour have got to be much broader than that. We're the party of working people, but the Labour created the welfare state to offer a safety net and support people when they are out of work as
But were
well.
you misspeaking, or were you trying to
sometimes-
signal? Were you trying to say, look, there's a danger that we look like the party of welfare or the party of...
Well, that's what I was being accused of in the interview, is that Labour had become a very narrow party, and I wanted to say, no, we're broader than that. But look, there's some things, and the way I expressed them, you know, did cause hurt to people, and I never meant to do that. That, you know, the Labour Party is a party of ordinary working class people, and it did amazing things like improving education and the health service and the welfare state to give working class people those things that they didn't have before.
What's interesting, talking to you about some of the things that you spoke of when you were on the front bench under Ed Miliband, is arguably though why Jeremy Corbyn left you on the back benches then. There were people, weren't there, at that time who called you a red Tory, sort of suggested that you weren't welcome in the Labour Party.
I found that very difficult, actually. I found it very difficult because I joined the Labour Party when I was 17. I've been in the Labour Party for 25 years now. And I love the Labour Party. I love its traditions. I love its history. And when people said that to me, I felt like, well, it's like, it's my family. Like, don't tell me I don't belong here. It's where I've always been. And I found that very hard, very hard. Very hard at conference after Jeremy Corbyn became leader, to people shouting that at me, because...
Screaming at you.
Yeah, I found that very difficult.
You look quite emotional just even remembering it. Was it a really tough time?
I did. I found it very difficult because I love the Labour Party. And, you know, I've been delivering leaflets and knocking on doors, for 25 years. And then people who, in many cases, had just joined for the first ever time, telling me that this wasn't my party.
I guess they'd say that, you know, you were once branded as part of what's called the Nando's five rising stars on the back benches, two of whom then did leave. Luciana Berger, Chuka Umunna then did leave the Labour Party.
And Luciana was hounded out of the party. I mean, you think I feel a bit emotional about this. Imagine how she felt. You know, her great uncle was a Labour MP, Manny Shinwell. She is from the party, from the Labour Party, from that tradition.
Do you want to welcome her back?
I'd love to have Luciana back in the Labour Party. She's still a friend of mine, and I would love to have her back in the Labour Party. Whether she would want to come back, that's a question you'd have to ask her. But
do you feel you've got the Labour Party back from the party that it was?
I stayed in the Labour Party because I believed that even in some of the darkest hours, which I think anti-Semitism was our darkest hour, and the way she was treated was our darkest hour, I believed that there was a way back for Labour. And, you know, some people made different choices, and I understand why they made them, and certainly Luciana felt she had no other choice. She was hounded out of the party. I feel like we've turned a corner on that now, and I'm proud of the small contribution, I guess, that I have made to that. But I'm really proud to be a Labour MP and really proud to be in Keir Starmer's shadow cabinet.
Now, you got labelled, and you'll probably groan when I mention this again. You got labelled, didn't you, by an accidental tweet from the editor of Newsnight. What did he say? Just remind us.
He said I was boring snoring.
Yes, it wasn't written to you, to be fair.
It wasn't. That's
he's now head of Channel 4. He's a very important man.
And Channel 4 is very welcome in Leeds, and we love Channel 4 and we love Ian Katz. But, you know, that is a mistake that, you know, you all think there, but for the grace of God go I, because all of us could have done that. You mean to send a text, but you put it on Twitter.
A serious question. Should a shadow chancellor be boring snoring?
Well, look, I
There's a
think there are
perfectly
worse-
good argument that shadow
think there are
chancellors
worse
should just be ever so slightly, not that you have been, I stress, but should be ever so slightly dull.
I think there are certainly worse criticisms that you could lay at the door of a chancellor.
So finally, if you could be a chess piece, what would it be?
Well, I think I'd be the Queen.
The most powerful piece on the board.
Look, I want to be the Queen and to get the opponent in checkmate. If you're asking, do I want to be leader of the Labour Party, that is never something that I've aspired to do. The job I want more than anything else is to be Chancellor, and I think it's a job that I'm well qualified to do.
Takes off glasses. Politician who doesn't want to reach the top. Rachel Reeves, thank you for joining me on Political Thinking.
Thank you, Nick.
Well, if chess is like politics, if it is a form of game, the truth is we're more than halfway through it. The next election could easily be in spring 2023, and Labour find themselves on the defensive. The Tories have already claimed some crucial pieces. Have the Labour Party got the moves up their sleeves in here to take advantage, to seize victory from defeat? Next week at their conference, we might get the first answer to that. That's it from this edition of Political Thinking. Thanks for watching.